Good morning, everyone. I'm Sotadeology. In today's video, we're going to dissect Sotadeology Lecture 13, the Time, Energy, Information System Part 2. Now, this is going to be the Part 2 of the initial video uploaded on YouTube. That particular one was titled the Time, Energy, Information System of Universe. So this is the part 2 of it. So now in this particular video, we're going to, drill deep, go deep into what information is. In that part 1, I made mention of information not being complete. And that is because there is no integration of analog information structure into the conventional information structure that we have, the one that we are currently using. And that one, it is actually based on binary uh, number system. Binary number system. So now, with binary number system, we cannot adequately model the efficiency or the functionality of analog information structure. And that is why that is being limited. I want to briefly give you, a typical example of why it is so essential for us to have analog information structure embedded in, the conventional information system that we'll be using in this era. The reason is for the fact that when you look at binary information, we have it in form of digital chunks. And so there are parts being cut from the information. For instance, if you are to have audio signal, then the title of the audio must be embedded in the signal for you to have, clear audio signal. So if any slight part of the audio signal is being cut off, we will actually, feel the effect in form of glitch, and that would, really be audible in that signal. And that is why there is this modem, which is modulator demodulator, to convert, because the internet service provider, they usually use telecommunication equipment, and so there must be this conversion from audio signal to digital signal, because the digital signal is what our computer can actually work effectively with. And that is why we are being constrained to that binary information system. And another the reason we're using the binary is for the fact that analog signal or analog information cannot easily be quantified as such or be pinned down for computation. So for that binary information system, we have, should I say, discrete value, 1 or 0. So combination of 1 and zeros, that is what constitutes the information, the conventional information. So we have that being a precise amount of information, and so it is ideal for computation. But right now, let's go let's go deeply into how we can integrate analog information system. So basically, I'm going to use these 4 diagrams that we have right here. So I want to start with this particular one. Now, before we can actually go to that analog information system, we need to know the time energy wave model. Now, what we have here is the time energy wave model. And now this is being derived as a result of application of formula of everything, which is the formula that we have right here. So now, when you look at this red trajectory, that is the trajectory of energy, and that is being inversely related to the trajectory of time, which is this blue trajectory. Now, when this formula of everything is applied, then we're going to have this emergence of the equilateral triangle. For instance, let's say we put this mass worth of electron in the place of this m and in the place of this m. This capital U is the constant speed of the universe. That capital U is the constant speed of the universe. And we have that to be 2.5 times 10 raised to power 39. So now, by having this electron's mass worth in the place of this m and in the place of this m, we're going to have classical counterpart, which is going to be this particular value, and that is going to be 2,277,250,000 kilograms. That is what we get. We get the actual classical counterpart value because we're using the mass worth from the quantum mechanics. Basically, the solution has to come, even though we have, solution in the quantum mechanics, and not even in the quantum mechanics, we have it in the complex system, which is even beyond the threshold constraint of quantum mechanics. So now, the thing is, the instant trajectory of time must come from the classical realm because there is a particular distant interval that we must have for us to have the ideal solution, for us to have the necessary energy force that can actually break this quantum arbitrary suspension and then travel beyond to connect to higher dimension where we can get the real quantum mass value, which is electron value. But basically, we usually have instant flipping mechanism in the complex system, and there is possibility for us to have electron of the higher dimension to instantly be flipped to positron. And then I will explain this flipping mechanism and how it works for the entitle of the universe. So right now we have this value. Now for us to get the necessary suspension that can actually allow us to have instant trajectory of time through to quantum and beyond to the complex system, then we will supply this value in the place of m and in the place of this m. When we do that, then the value that we're going to get is going to be this particular value. And now this value that we have, that is the diagonal trajectory, which is the you can see that it is linear. And that is why when you look at the formula of everything, we have linear solution nested right inside the curvature of time to energy. So basically we have dm here. So mass is another form of energy, and mass is emergent. It is flexible because mass serves as determinant of the smooth flow of time, and that results to flexible structure of the space. And that is why we're using mass right here. But basically we can actually tag that to the raw energy when we have drawing the curvature for us to have the time energy wave model. So now we know that the real mass worth at classical level is the emergent value right here, and then you can see the position, but we don't know this yet. Now when we supply this, we get this particular value. Now this value, for us to be able to get this classical arbitrary suspension, we need to extend this value in standard form. And when we do that, we will discover that this arbitrary suspension, which is the base value without dot of this electron's mass worth, is suspended at 32nd position. So we have couple of zeros that suspend this base value of electron without dot, which is 9109 at 32nd position. Now by having that, so when we draw that, because basically that zero suspension that we have will have to come from the singularity of the Big Bang. And so we know that the trajectory is going to be diagonal, and that is an action of energy and time. So definitely we're going to have reaction of such action that will travel inversely into the quantum realm. And so by having that, it's going to be equal. So now this trajectory is the constant, is the constancy of light speed. Why this trajectory is the constancy of gravity. So now we have this to be 5.7 times 10 raised power 48, and this is 5.7 times 10 raised power minus 48. And so that is going to be, now for every real action, there must always be an imaginary reaction. You understand? So we basically, it is not yet imaginary, but we can call it a real reaction in this case because we are right inside the real 2D plane. Now this is 2D plane, and that is real. That is where the real, system is taking place. So now we have this to be this, but the moment we transcend this limit into the complex system, then we're going to have imaginary worth. So now, by extending that, we now have this classical arbitrary suspension being suspended at 32nd position of zeros. And then for us to travel vertically down, because this vertical trajectory is so essential to close up this equilateral triangle to make it complete. And even though this trajectory is asymmetric, because it travels even beyond, then we have part that closes this equilateral triangle, and then we have the equilateral triangle to be the structure of the universe, and that represents the symmetric nature of the universe. So now the curvature that we have, of course, that would represent the varied attachment to the symmetric worth of the universe. So now for us to have this vertical line, then the suspended zeros, we need to annihilate them. So we manually annihilate, but basically we're going to have spontaneous annihilation right here because the classical arbitrary suspension is being suspended where it is extremely weak, and so we're going to have free fall. Now the free fall that we have from here to this place, that is the classical that is the classical gravity. That is the classical gravity. Classical gravity is a free fall. But now, what do we have from here to this place? So now, when we get to this place, then from here to here, what we get there will serve as resistance, and that is the quantum gravity. So now, the trajectory, by manually annihilating the suspended zeros, so it's more or less like we're traveling through the zeros, and so now we have this vertical trajectory. Being vertical means that it is instant, and that is the instant trajectory of time. Now this central horizontal line, that is the infinite trajectory of energy. So we'll get to know why it is infinite later. So now we now have resistance right here, because if you look at the electron's worth is 9.109 times 10 raised power minus 31. So by annihilation, we're going to get 9.109 times 10 raised power minus 32. Now we know that 32 is smaller to this value, and that means that it has entered the value we got has entered into the black hole. Now don't forget that this trajectory is a one-way traffic, so we can only traverse this trajectory once. Now we used mass worth of electron to traverse it to get this classical mass worth. That is the one-way traffic that we should have. Then by supplying this one into the formula to traverse it again, it has become 2 times, and so the exact position of this vertical line is being shifted into the future, and so we have that value to be in form of power of minus 32, and you can see that 32 is smaller to 31, and it means that the value has been decayed by power of minus 1. Okay, so now when you look at this value that we have here, the suspending value is 5.7 times 10 raised to power. It will now be, by moving down, it will now be 5.7 times 10 raised to power uh minus 32. So having this value to be minus 32, then it means that our electrons value will be instantiated right inside the nucleus, because this suspension is even after the um, electrons watt. Now electrons watt is bigger than that value, so it will be instantiated in the nucleus. So we're going to see this place right from this suspension down to this place to be our nucleus. And so by having that, we know that electrons should be here. But by applying that formula of everything, we could see the accumulation of mass worth, because when you now supply this particular value in the place of this formula of everything, you will see that you move close to the zero by this value. And then when you look at this, it means that we have the low limit, which is this value 5.7 times 10 raised power minus 32, and then 0.0000001423. So we have the lowest bound around the electron and the highest bound around the electron. So electron is not being defined at this point. So now we need to know when, the point where electron will be instantiated, and the trajectory has to go beyond this limit. Now, by the virtue of the mass accumulation, the momentum of the mass accumulation will actually align with the curvature of energy, because it will get rid of the discrete nature of energy. Because when we look at it, energy is ahead of time here, because energy will be energized to move faster in order to be able to align with the continuous flow of time. And when that happens, energy will become continuous as well. And then we have this. So what we have here, we can call it a global now, because when you look at it, energy being discrete here, we let us have tilting effect of time peregrination towards the past. And so the trajectory is diagonal, not really entirely diagonal. So the momentum of energy is shorter to the continuous flow of time in that sense. So when it reaches the limit of this linear trajectory, then we have approached where we really have intense curvature, and that will accelerate the momentum of energy. And by having that accelerated momentum, constantly accelerating momentum, that will result to curvature, will result to alignment. And by having the alignment, we're going to have standing wave that will project into the higher dimension. And once it is connected to the higher dimension, we can connect to the electron of the higher dimensions nucleus, and that will instantly be flipped to positron. By having the electron of higher dimension to be positron, then electron will be instantiated here. We have real electron right here, and that will retract positron back into the system for us to have momentum into the black hole. Now that is the whole system. Now this system can be likened to the transistors working system. Now for transistor could serve as a switch, and it could serve as a magnifying, like a transformer, something that can magnify electric signal. You understand? So now, by having, if you look at the way resistor, transistor work. Transistor is just transfer resistance. The way it works is that when you do not have the base, there is a base, there is emitter, and then we have collector. So now when it serves as switch, then it it changes the signal. It works on the signal that you have as input relative to that emitter. You understand? So now if the input signal is 0, then that resistance will be infinite. Then the gate, because transistor is a gate function. So now the gate will be opened, and then you could, in that sense, have 10 volt as the output. Now, if the input is 10 volt, you understand, then the resistance will be nothing, so the gate will not open. And then, so when the gate is not opened, then your output will be 0. Now that is how we are able to have the signal that we could map 1 and 0s onto, for us to have that conventional information structure that we have. So now that's why we could have that conventional information structure that we have. But now when you look at it, when you have momentum traveling away from the real mass world, we have tilting effect of time peregrination towards the past. And by having that, it means that the momentum of energy is shorter to the momentum of time. Anytime you have time ahead of energy, you are going to have real mass worth. And that is why we could have real mass worth right here. And now at the point where we have the standing wave, we could know where the classical mass worth is. And so now, by the virtue of the standing wave, we get connected to this positron, and then that will be inserted into the system. So now, but what do you think will happen in this phase? In this phase, the energy energized phase will propel energy to be ahead of time. And once we have that, that will lead to decaying virtue of the classical mass worth. And so we'll continuously have, contracting phase of the black hole. So by having that, that will be towards the singularity of the black hole. So now, how can we then have analog information structure? So now I'm going to use this particular diagram here to illustrate that. Now, I said time energy wave system could, work as transistor. And we see that when we have instant trajectory of time, there is no energy, voltage, as input, you understand? So basically, the gate will open. And once the gate is opened, we move beyond this quantum arbitrary suspension. And by moving into the, infinite sea of energy, then the moment we get connected to the higher dimensions electron, the whole infinite energy will be converged to mass worth. And that is the point where we can even be conscious. You understand? So I will talk more about consciousness as we progress. So now, once we have this, the converged mass worth that we are connected to will now serve as the output. So that is why I relate this to this. So now let's look at this, the time energy information system. When you look at the tape that we have up here, that is the digital information space structure, and it is rigid. So now we have combination of ones and zeros. Then analog information space structure, that one is flexible, and you can see what we have right here. if you look at this, we have analog information space structure, and that is flexible. So now we want to do it in such a way that we have zeros and one, and yet we still want to have that variations being integrated into that system. So now what we have is, based on what I have explained in the time energy wave model, we have equilateral triangle. So if we have the equilateral triangle being flipped as we have it here, then we're going to have zero for imaginary number, because it will have traveled into the complex system to have imaginary zero. And we cannot get real value without getting imaginary value. Now, when you look at this time energy wave model, we do not know the position of this real classical mass until we are connected to the higher dimension to get connected to the positron, and then electron is instantiated in the nucleus, and so we now get this real classical mass world's position. And so the feedback from this complex system to the real classical mass world, that is the feeling, that is the sensation of being conscious. So we really need to know the exact position of things, and for us to know the exact position of things, there must be a genuine contact to the particle, and that is why we have this instant trajectory to genuinely connect to that positron. So now, when we now look at this, we know that imaginary number must be instantiated for us to have real number. So when we have the equilateral triangle being flipped like this, we're going to have zero, because the trajectory is towards zero, which is the Big Bang singularity, and then the black hole singularity, we have zero. Now the trajectory that that electron will follow will now be the trajectory that will be smooth, which will be the trajectory of time. It will be curved, and so the variation will be part of that trajectory. So it could assume any value. Now you see we have 0.5 here up to the 1. So 1 will be instantiated where we have this classical arbitrary suspension. So now it could assume any value. It could be 0.1, it could be 0.13456, it could be 0.6, it could be 0.8, it could be 0.9999, and that will make it to be analog. You understand? So, but by having inverse flipped equilateral triangle, we know that the value that we will have will be 0. And then when we now get to this place, if it is being flipped, if equilateral triangle is being flipped the way we have it like this, then it will be 1, because the momentum will be from 1 to 0. It will be from 1 to 0. So now the momentum will now be from 0.5 to 0. So you can see that we are having reduction from 1 down to the 0 here, and that will follow the negative path, which is the energy path. Down here you can see that this one is following the time path, positive. We have positive sign there. So this one is following the energy path, and then we have negative right there. So now by having this, we can actually have that flavor of variation in our system, and then when you look at the connecting string, we have relativity. You can see that we have red here, we have black here. Relativity will travel inversely as we have it like this, and so we have connection to what is emergent. It is not that we just randomly get number and map it onto electric signal to form our information structure. We have necessary emergent that is being relativistically connected, and then that could serve as our genuine information structure. And this information structure is what I actually used in my the invention of time technology. I have a book on Amazon which I have published. If you get a copy, you'll get detailed information about that time technology. So now, to be informed is to be conscious. There is this inextricable connection between information and consciousness. Now, You are said to be conscious the moment you are being informed, and you are being informed to be conscious. And that is why imaginary number is an inverse determinant of what real number should be in analog information system. So now there are some other things too that we need to pay attention to. The inverse relationship of time's instancy to energy's infinity is the flexible structure of space to adequately accommodate mass work from 0 through to 1. Now basically, by having this system, it's going to effectively manage space usage. It will effectively manage space usage in the sense that there will be no free space to a particular data that space is being assigned to. So then optimization of space usage, yes, I had mentioned that. Dynamic mass work to flexible space defines a system ideal for growing universe. So it defines ideal system for growing universe and then contracting universe. So now we have time energy wave model here. And so now when you look at it, the place where we can have that zero will be from singularity, and the singularity of Big Bang will give us positive zero. Now in that invention of time technology, we have we have four integers, and I call them quaternary. Instead of using binary, we're going to be using quaternary number, and therefore plus 0, negative 0, plus 1, negative 1. Those are the four numbers. So now here, from the Big Bang singularity, we have plus 0, and then we have the so now we're going to have positive 0 here from the Big Bang singularity, as you can see. And so that will lead to the expansion of the universe. So right inside the equilateral triangle, we have suspension, we have inflationary suspension. And now what we have right inside, before that inflationary suspension, is we have trajectory of energy being ahead of time. And as a result of that, time could not, properly instantiate mass worth to restrict that momentum. And so after the inflationary suspension, we have time being, ahead of energy. And that is why we could have convergence of mass worth right inside the system to restrict that, propelling momentum of energy. And then we still have this inverse trajectory as well to reduce that expanding momentum of the universe as well. So now at this central line, we have balanced momentum, and at that spot where we have balanced momentum, that is where we could, get reality. That is where we could, get consciousness. And so now, right here, then there must be introduction of that positron for us to have energy energized, to have momentum into the black hole. Right inside the black hole, we have another suspension, neutron star suspension. And right in that, the nucleus of the suspension, we have time being ahead of energy. And so we could have real mass convergence right there. So dominant force charge is negative 0. Negative charge here in the black hole. So while the dominant force charge is positive 0, you can see that there. So now in the nucleus, in the singularity, we have clumps of energy or energy density. So in the nucleus, we have clumps of mass or mass density. So now this whole thing is what I call time energy wave model. And so when you look at it, time technology uses quaternary, like I said the other time. So those are the four numbers. Then digital computer uses binary. So now that is that. Then another thing we need to now talk about would be this complex system of the universe. Now, the complex system of the universe, the equation is this: e to the I theta equal cosine theta plus I sine theta. So now, the cosine theta is the real wave, while I sine theta is imaginary wave. So now, the imaginary wave serves as energy reservoir for real energy. When you look at this wave curvature, which is red, that is the imaginary wave, and then the black wave curvature, that is the real wave. Now, when we get to this place, you see that where you have the real mass to be zero, that is when it is so now you see that the wave is at the central point. So where we have real wave to be exhausted of energy, then there is the imaginary wave energy is at its peak, and so that could be substituted for the real wave. So that is why I said imaginary energy is, energy reservoir for real energy. Then another thing about imaginary is that imaginary, it deals with flipping system. So when you have I, the value of I is square root of -1. So a square root of -1. Now, when you have I to the power of 2, that is going to be a -1. Now, when you have I to the power of 3, that will be -I. So you will see that flipping pattern as we progress. And then when you have I to the power of 4, we have that to be 1. So you see that imaginary number usually flips. It usually flips as it progresses. So that is imaginary number for you. And that is why we have that flipping mechanism at, complex level. So now when you look at the equilateral triangle that we have here, this red one is negative charge, which is the substrate equilateral triangle 2D. And so we know that should be electrons equilateral triangle. And then the black equilateral triangle, that is the positive charge. So we're saying that we'll get connected to the positron for us to have the full system. And so when we're talking about this whole reality of the universe, then there are 4 things to consider: 2D to 3D transition, quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement happens at, quantum level, and then it transcends to the complex level. So that is why we could have instant transmission of information by entanglement. And then the third one is flipping mechanism. The flipping mechanism is, often activated by that imaginary number at complex level. And then we have complex system integration. Complex system integration is where we have, the retracting of positron into the system to energize momentum for us to have, propelling momentum into the black hole. So now, the whole system at the present phase will give us this. So the vertical line at the present phase of time peregrination, when you zoom in on that, we're going to have stacked of equilateral triangle upon each other. And then once we have that, they will be suspended such that we have compacted equilateral triangle at the edge, all around the edges. And that is why you could see that this place where we have suspension, quantum arbitrary suspension to the curvature of the energy, that is our the nucleus of the black hole. And up here, we have this to be the nucleus of the, classical. And that is why Schwarzschild, in his solution of general relativity, you see that we have two singularities in that solution. So we always have two singularities. There is one, so we usually have singularity of the Big Bang and then singularity of the black hole. So now, so when we now zoom on the vertical line, which is this particular line, the instant trajectory of time, then we're going to have this. And by having compacted equilateral triangle all around the edges of the stacked equilateral triangle, you can get to know that this could actually be transformed to circle. So the compacted equilateral triangles around the edges will smoothen out the effect of energy, the discrete nature of energy, and so we could have curvature. And that is why we have mass convergence in the nucleus. So you can see that we have spiral formation. It's an inward spiral formation right here. And so by applying formula of everything, we're able to get quasar-like signal right at the core singularity of black hole. So we know quasar-like signal is, swinging forth and back. And so we're going to dive deep to get to know that as we progress in this video. So now, application of formula of everything. The TDM equal to capital M plus 4M. When we substitute electrons value inside the formula, we're going to have this. So we have this. And then that will give us the classical counterpart value, like I said the other time. So this is the classical mass. Now, when we now put the classical mass inside the formula, we're going to have this. And by having that, this will be our result. When we now expand that in standard form, we're going to have the suspension right at the 32nd position of 0. So for us to get the quantum value of that suspension, we need to manually annihilate the suspended zeros. And so when we do that, we're going to do that by having the value of right here divided by 10 raised power 32, because that 32nd position of zeros will give us 10 raised power 32. So equal. So when we now expand that fraction, we're going to have 9.109 times 1 all over 10 raised power minus 32. So that will actually give us this value that we have. And the reason we have this value is because we have traversed that trajectory 2 times, and it has shifted into the black hole. And so we have decay effect on it, because minus 32 is smaller than minus 31. And so we're going to, look at the effect of decay right from the quantum level to the classical level for us to examine cross entropy. You understand? Cross entropy will give us the reason it is so essential for us to integrate analog information system into our conventional information system. So now we have that as our result. So if we now use what we have here, the result inside the formula, then that will give us this value. Then the difference of at the power, we have that decaying worth of -1 at the power. That effect has resulted to about 2 billion worth of classical mass worth being decayed. Now that could be called, we can liken that to butterfly effect. So at quantum level, we have tiny decay, and that has resulted to huge decay at classical level. So now here, if we should put these results that we have, so we're going to get rid of this value at the back of the dot, because we want to really know the position, what we're going to have next. So if we should include that, that might deprive us of having the real position of positron or particle. You understand? So now we truncate that, and so we put that inside the formula of everything, and then the result we have is this. When we now extend this in standard form, we discover that the zeros, we have a decayed value of the base being suspended to zeros at 31st position. So it has taken it back to the power of electron, the real power of electron, but the base worth is being decayed. The base worth is being decayed. Now see what we have as the base worth. So now we need to manually annihilate the suspended zeros, and when we do that, we're going to have this, and then the final result is 1.1. 1.1109 times 10 raised power minus 31 kilogram. Now if you look at what is happening right here, you know that we have worth of -1 at the power, but at the base we have worth of 1.1. You can see that that is asymmetric in nature. Now if we should reiterate by supplying this particular value in our formula, then it will result to looping. So we have looping. So the maximum limit we could reach is the point where this base mass worth is being decayed to this particular value. Now that could be likened to the swinging forth and back of quasar signal right at the core of black hole. So basically what is actually happening is that, don't forget that I said in this black hole, in this phase of black hole, we have energy being ahead of time, and so when energy reaches this place, time is energized, and then time right in the nucleus is ahead of energy, and so we could have real mass formation in the nucleus right here. So now what I want you to know is that the cross entropy that we have in this phase is asymmetric, because the tiny decay at quantum level resulted to huge decay at classical level. And apart from that, even right inside the nucleus, the final result is asymmetric, and that would suspend for us to have that virtue of that infinite energy. And that is why this trajectory, this central trajectory, is the infinite trajectory of energy. So that is that. Then another thing you need to know is that with this we can use it to track back propagation. So right now we have deterministic results, and that will aid the learning process of AI. So what I'm trying to say is that I'm trying to use AI for us to know that even AI in its learning system, it uses weight and then bias. So the input will be multiplied with the weight, and then everything will be added to that bias value. So the final result that you get, that will determine the neuron's learning system. You understand? So basically, there is another function as well that we reduce that within 0 and 1. And when you have that, you must as well have back propagation so as to narrow down that difference between the bias measure and then the real measure. And that defines the navigating system of AI learning system. So now the back propagation will be implemented by using, differential calculus, and the particular rule that is being often used, that is chain rule. So we have everything in the formula of everything, and so by having that variation in that in that contracting phase, by having that variation such that the decaying effect or at quantum level could result to huge decaying effect at classical level, that shows that we have integrated analog information system into the whole computation, because from that we can effectively track learning momentum, or track the real momentum towards the singularity law of the black hole. So we often have real actual value. It is not probabilistic. So we have real value to work with, and so formula of everything could be used to actually implement this analog information system. And once we have that, it is more genuine than the conventional information system that we are currently using, because it is emergent as a result of relativity, and then the flipping mechanism that we have connects imaginary number to real number, and so we can't have real number without having imaginary number. So that is thorough modeling of universe, unlike the conventional information system that we have, where 1 and 0s are being mapped onto electrical signal to define the information structure. So the kind of information structure we have in analog information system is the type that gets emergent as a result of relationship between imaginary number and real number. And so we know that it's only the real number that will be computing, or that will be used in our computation. And that is how we can actually have that quaternary number system in time technology. So I have book on that already on Amazon. You can get a copy of that to get more information about it. But now, if we look at this mechanical system of consciousness, what we have right here is that whatever you experience, whatever that comes from outside will serve as your input, and that will go through electromagnetic field sample. And then even if what you are absorbing as input, if they are at different intervals, they will be harmonized, more or less like the way you have different notes that are being played at different frequency being harmonized, such that we will perceive them as being played at once. And then after that we have gravitational field sample, and there is where we have internalization of the missing piece. So now the missing piece is the positron that we get connected to at higher dimension, and once that is integrated into the the substrate dimension, then that will flip momentum towards the equilibrium. It will flip this classical mass down to this equilibrium point at the central phase, and that this equilibrium point is the equilibrium intersection of time and energy. And once you have the mass worth right here, you would have gotten the momentum to reach this black hole singularity. Don't forget that time is behind energy in this phase, so that would have reset the mass worth to be at the central point right here. And once you have the mass worth here, it means that that external input is being internalized, and that is when you can have subjective awareness or subjective experience. Now, subjective experience is personal. So basically, what you get outside will not be the totality of what is obtainable. And then the little that you get injected into the substrate system will now be internalized, and that will be your own reality. So we can only say that subjective experience is biased by not getting the whole information, and by not, exhausting the whole energy in the black hole. That suspension is needed for us to have, that infinite sensation as we often have it. So the moment you have it at the central point, then you have internalized that subjective experience, and then it becomes your personal conscious virtue. So now, what do I mean by that? What I'm trying to say is that if you are, for instance, let's say somebody is just walking by, is just passing by, walking by, or passing by, and then a music is being played. That person might be, conscious of that music, but after a while, the music will fade away from that person's mind, because the person only retains that information at the first phase of consciousness, which is the phase of getting the actual position of real classical mass worth. Now you can see that the position of real classical mass worth to the positron down here is not at the equilibrium, but it will be at the equilibrium the moment positron is injected, such that we now reach this place, and then it will have been, reset the mass worth to be at the central equilibrium point. So now, the point where the person might be able to internalize that music is probably when that person has listened to that music repeatedly, such that he has known every lyric of that music. So by that time, then the music has become part of that particular person, that the person will not be able to even forget that music again. So now that is that about information. And from, you can see that the feedback here, we have feedback to the classical mass worth, and that feedback that we have, because the time trajectory is one-way traffic, so we can't traverse that trajectory two times. So the moment we get connected to this positron, there will be feedback of that connection, and that will reach this real classical mass world. That feedback, that is the sensation of being conscious. That is the sensation of being conscious. So that information is transmitted instantly, and that is why we can only get the real position of particle at instant speed of time. So if we are still within the constraint of light speed, we can never get particle at the point it's supposed to be. And so getting particle at its exact point, that is the reality of consciousness. And that is why we get consciousness at the present phase of this time energy peregrination. So consciousness is emergent at the present phase. It is not fundamental. I've even argued that, like, if you say consciousness is fundamental, then it means that even we humans would have contributed to our own creation, because we would be conscious of everything as we were being created. So for the fact that we could not contribute to our shape the way we want it to be, it means that consciousness is not fundamental. So that is that. Consciousness is emergent, and then based on that, you could see that we now have the proper analog information system, and it is possible for us to have this system by using formula of everything. So that is that about this video. I'm going to put link to my research publication in the description below, so anyone who has interest can actually get a copy and work more on that research publication. I have it on peer-reviewed journal online. So when you get connected to me on YouTube, you will actually get links to my research publication in the description below. Then I'm going to put then I want you to share this video. I want you to share this video because I want it to travel as far, as wide as possible, so that people can get to know that quantum mechanics is being unified to classical mechanics. And then so that is it. Thank you. God bless you.